Tesla, a couple months ago, gave everybody a free access to self-drive. You download the software and you bang your head against the windshield and the car just begins to run, change lanes and do all sorts of things on its own. In some ways, it's so comfortable. When you are given a syllabus and they say, well, you're supposed to cover David Hume and then Thomas Hobbes and then Immanuel Kant, and then 5 minutes before the class ends, give these 5x8 cards to students, let them fill out A, B, C, D. And then once it's done, you go to the office and you read them, score them, and then go home. And then on your way home, your companion asks, so what's for dinner? And you say, well, go in the kitchen and make some food that has no butter in it. And are we going to do anything tonight? Yeah, we'll probably sit and watch a movie and then we'll go to sleep. There is so much power and control in the routines of life. You don't have to think, you don't have to examine, you have to reflect. And because our lives are relatively small, the questions that come up, hopefully, are also relatively small. And they don't cause a great amount of distress. And it's good to be on autopilot. Because the flip side, depending on what exactly it is that you mean by autopilot, you know, I envy my brother. Every time I call him, he says, I'm preparing for my class. What are you doing? You've been teaching for 30 years. What is it to prepare? So I'll have to keep reading and writing and doing this and doing that. And his days are just filled from the moment he wakes up. Just creating a syllabus or a format for his class. And he goes and he's very much by the book. I come to class and I say, okay, what's really worth talking about? And I don't find very many things interesting. And what that does is it makes a good amount of your day irrelevant. You know, you have young students who are filled with hope and dreams, and you come to class like a black cloud, and you kind of just rain on their parade. Is that really a fair thing to do, a just thing to do? And in some ways it really isn't. I think because it's good to be young and it's good to have dreams and hopes. I mean, it's kind of like, you know, you have a doctorate in ABCD, then you have a postdoc, then you have another postdoc, and you have another postdoc. And you realize, well, it's such a safe place to be. You know, you bury your head in books and in classes and in writing and in talking in safe environments such as this. And then the moment this ends, you realize you have to go into life, and life is, what the hell do you do in life? First, it's useless, doesn't have much to offer. Second, if it had any use, there's so much struggle and strife in it. Why not just do another postdoc and keep just staying here? It's comfortable. Things are just known. And if I come across something that disturbs me, I can Google it, go to the library, talk to my professors. And after 2, 3, 4, 5 years, I'll have another degree under my belt. It reminds me of the story, you know, where it's a Persian story and it has Plato in it. It's fictional, really. That Plato was really tired writing the dialogues. And so he says, my eyes hurt, my back hurts, my knees hurt, I just need to go for a walk. I've been sitting for way too long. And he walks around and he sees a boatsman. And he gets on his boat and he says, the boatsman asks, Vasudev, that's the boatsman of the book Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. Vasudev asks Plato, where do you want to go? And Plato says, I've been writing all day and thinking all day, I'm tired, you can go and take me anyway, it doesn't really matter. And he's very proud of all the things he's accomplished, all the writings, and all of his insights. And he puts his hand in his pocket, grabs a couple of sheets that he's written, philosophy, gives it to the boatsman, Vasudev, and says, read this and tell me how it sounds. And this boatsman says, I don't really know how to read or write. And Plato shakes his head, you know, disgustingly, saying, a person who doesn't know how to read or write, half of his life is a waste. But there is something to be said about people who live life, who get bombs dropped on their heads, who have to travel to 25 countries to get themselves to the US, whose parents are immigrants and they've worked really, really hard to make ends meet, and finally they are able to send their kids to school and make them come out something. There's a humility to them, you know, that despite the harshness of life, they're very calm, serene, respectful, filled with dignity, grace. So this boatsman says nothing to Plato, but he smells his arrogance. Some time passes and Vasudev looks at Plato and says, you see those clouds there? He says, yeah. Plato is thinking about what chapter he's going to write next, you know. So they're kind of dark and bleak. Don't interrupt me, says Plato to the guy. He says, well, do you know how to swim, by the way? No, swimming is beneath me. I sit and write. I don't waste my time in ridiculous pleasures of life. And Vasudev looks at Plato and says, he who doesn't know how to swim, his entire life is a waste. Plato shakes his head saying, ignorant people, illiterate people always say stupid things. So as he's rowing the boat, it begins to rain, and then it begins to rain really heavily, and then it begins to storm, and there's a hurricane coming their way, and the boat is getting filled with water, more and more and more, and the heavier the boat gets, the more it sinks into the sea or the ocean or the river. And the boat sinks, and the boatsman knows how to swim, and Plato screams, help me! He says, why don't you write about swimming? Maybe that'll save your life. And that's the thing about life. Once you are forced out of autopilot, it's one thing for you to self-drive and kind of know the risks. But we have this, it's not a relative, I can't say they're my relatives, but I suppose acquaintances. They have money coming out of their nose. They're rich. Their daughter went to dental school. Her husband went to dental school. Dental school is expensive. It's like $500,000 for each kid. It's a lot of money you got to spend. They have never worked in a dental shop. Oh, but man, they can sit and they talk for hours. But they have a kid who's has some anger issues, and he's been seeing a therapist ever since he was like 3 or 4. I guess the point I'm trying to make really is, there is this place, and I don't know why Plato never talked about this, why Jesus never talked about it. It's such a wonderful, beautiful insight to have as, I suppose, a thinker. To be able to observe, to be able to reflect, to be able to dissect any part of life, to understand it really, really well, you have to be so detached. It's like you want to see what lives inside your dog. But human nature has empathy in it, has sadness, has loss, has grief. You also hate to see yourself as someone who takes away a life for the sake of curiosity. But all of a sudden, you gradually get yourself to a place where you just see it as a thing to explore. So you tie your dog to a table with ropes and tape, and you cut his jugular. And you see this dog jerking violently, but it doesn't impact you. There is not an ounce of negative emotions about you, no self-reflection why I did this. You're consumed by one thing and one thing alone. I wonder what lives inside him. And once the dog has died and all the blood is out, you grab this razor blade or sharp knife and you cut the belly open. And you just go through it like the way you go through your closet. That's one of the things about philosophy. If, I suppose, you do it in a reflective way, that you stand back and you ask why. And the why doesn't really get many answers. And all you know is that there is this huge why that you put after everything you see, observe, you reflect. There are no answers, and it pains you. And you want to become intimate, but you can't. You're now in the habit of just asking a lot of whys. And what Siddhartha comes to realize as he is gripped with a sense of disgust about who he is and about life, about all of his journey, is that he says, I envy two people walking around the lake holding hands, and one looking at the other saying, I love you. I envy someone going to school and getting a postdoc despite having 5. I envy them because they can have fun with life. They can be in life. They don't question life. They don't question what it means to be human this or human that. They just love. They love their kids. And when you think about kids, really, all these ridiculous, useless things that walk into classrooms and then eventually become adults who get married and have useless kids. Because we've had 5,000 years of cultures. They tell you at a certain age you go to school, at a certain age you graduate, at a certain age you get your license, you buy a car, you get a job, you get married, you have children, you buy a house. You don't question any of it. But the moment you begin to reflect, to be a bit more detached or objective, nothing makes any sense. And I'm not quite sure if it's the best path to take. It is best to be on autopilot. Once you've been contaminated, that's a different story. There is the scene in what is that movie? It's like this young kid was in love with this other young kid, a man and a woman. The woman says no to him and he's devastated. And he doesn't know how he can love anyone else besides this woman. And so he becomes a priest. The woman comes back after like 20 years and she brings with her a young kid. And this young kid happens to be his son. The young kid drowns while they're, swimming. And the woman looks at him and says, "Do you know who this kid was?" "Yeah, it was your son, I'm so sorry." He says, "No, it was our son." And he goes to the altar in his church and kneels and cries and screams and he says, "Why wasn't I able to love you, God, the way I love this woman?" That once in a while you have these experiences in life and they open you. They open certain parts of you. They reveal to you what love really tastes like, what thinking really feels like, what true emotions feel when something devastating happens to you, where you really understand from the very core of your being that life offers you no justice. Life is not fair. And then you talk to someone who's been buried in school or a life that's been comfortable in the cradle of privilege. And they keep talking about justice, and they keep talking about this, and they keep talking about that. I mean, consider Immanuel Kant. Great guy. He thinks really, really well about things. But he's like Carlton in Prince of Bel-Air. He never left his gated community. And the one or twice that he left and he found life to be a little problematic, he didn't know what to do with it. Immanuel Kant can just sit in his room and write a book about beauty, but as Robin Williams would say, yeah, Matt Damon is this crazy kid. He's a genius though. He's got all this knowledge in his head, but no practical experience. And they're sitting in the park and Robin Williams says to him, "If I was to ask you to tell me about love, you'd quote me Shakespeare. But you've never been in a room where your wife is dying because she has stage 4 cancer, where you feel completely helpless. It's nice to be Immanuel Kant, like this beautiful book about love. He's got this wonderful article about sex and masturbation, Immanuel Kant does. But, to fall in love with a woman in the 18th century, and it's a time where you don't do those things. So you have to really cross some dangerous cultural lines to find yourself in love. And all of a sudden you grab a pen and a piece of paper and you want to continue your writing about what knowledge is. But you realize you have this emotion that's obstacling your writing. You can't write. Life has touched you. Life has revealed to you something profound, majestic, and everything else just pales. To have sex when you're in love is much different to just sit and think about sex. To fall in love, چون قلم در می نوشتن می شتافت، چون به عشق آمد قلم در عشق در خود شکافت. That when you're not in love, you can write about love. But when you're in love, the moment you pick up the pen to write about it, the pen refuses to write. He says, "I'm unworthy to speak of love. I'm unworthy to write about love." So you can do whatever. I'm not participating in this charade. But going back to your question, it's good to be on autopilot. It's good not to question, not to examine. And then there is also, let me also add this other part to it. Sometimes you live here in this room and your life is very, very comfortable. You've had some intellectual disturbances, life, you want it to go this way, it goes the opposite way. So you suffer a little bit, then you overcome it, you forget it, and life goes on as usual. But if something devastating was to happen, like a 9/11, it's the first time. Pearl Harbor was 50 years ago. Who remembers that? Nobody, especially not people of this generation. They only read books about it. I don't even know if they can remember those things or even feel those things, especially since they're beginning to write that slavery was some workforce to educate black people. History is being rewritten in ridiculous ways, but it's working. Sometimes you're an adult and you've lived a comfortable life and devastation happens, but your skin isn't thick. You don't know what to do with the devastation. Sometimes you go to school, you get married, you have children, and then you hit a midlife crisis. And by that I mean you hit a position in life where you are forced to really, really, really think. But your thinking takes place in the background of already made life. You're like a 30, 40-year-old person. You have your religious beliefs. You have a husband or a wife, or you have both. You have 5 kids. And now you begin to think And when you think, the problem is you think about your religious beliefs, it doesn't make any sense. You think about why you got married, that doesn't make any sense. Why you got married to this particular person, that doesn't make any sense. And you look at this mess and you say, how the hell am I going to protect these kids? Why did I even have them in the first place? That doesn't make any sense. And then if you begin to reflect on this deeply, you realize, well, you're basically cutting yourself off from life. That's one type of reflection that happens, unfortunately, when your life is built. And it's like an earthquake, everything just crumbles. Then you have the kids in Palestine. They're like 5, they're like 6. They have nothing. And you realize from the moment they're born, they only know one thing: life is unfair. They live the gospel teaching that do not build your house on sand. The world is a sand. Whatever you build, it'll be destroyed. And so you realize that when these kids become adults, they have tasted the dysfunctional nature of life. They get married, but they've been seasoned that your wife could have cancer at any time. You could die at any time. You don't get married for love. You get married for security, because life is very insecure. You have children not because children are fun. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is the following. Sometimes you begin your reflective life when you have lived and built a life of autopilot. And that could be awful, because your husband looks at you and says, what is wrong with you? You and I used to have great conversations, but now nothing. We used to have fun. We used to be intimate, nothing. Used to be engaged, now nothing. And your husband doesn't understand what's happening to you. Your kids don't understand what's happening to you. Here, your kids will bend over backwards to make this thing work, but you're just not reachable. You've become far too contaminated. It's like reflection equals cancer stage 4. No remedy to it. And then you, because you happen to be a kind, decent, warm person you've always been, you try to go back to the way that you've always been. But every time you go back with a good amount of reflective abilities, and you see 10 good things and 50 bad things. Or you feel 10% and reflect 90%. And reflection doesn't bring about positive images. It really doesn't. Reflection always yields fruits that are bitter. The flip side is you're 14, 15, 16, you haven't really tasted life as much. And all of a sudden, you begin to like thinking deeply about things. It happens accidentally, it happens as a thing to have some fun with, then it becomes a habit. Anything that doesn't require a good amount of reflection, you feel bad about yourself, that you're shortchanging yourself. You have this ability to think deeply about things, but this particular group always brings to the surface, and you talk about cheesy, ridiculous things, and you hate yourself for that. And then reflection becomes really who you are. 80% reflection and 20% autopilot, just so you can just have some fun in life. And then it's time for you to get married. You sit with your friends and they tell you how much they love their companion. And you say, yes, I love my companion too. But what's missing in your voice is passion.